I'm so glad to introduce our pastor, Pastor Peter, also known as my dad. I think that's probably what he's most well known as, is my dad.
Yeah.
But why don't you welcome him? Put your hands together. In the chat, I want you to quickly right now, here, this is dangerous, isn't it? What is your favourite thing about Pastor Peter? Can you put that in right now?
That's very hard, Caleb. There's only so much they can write.
Yeah, I know there's only so much they can write. That's correct. What is your favourite thing about Pastor Peter? Is it his beautiful red hair? Is it the way he teaches? Is it his football team? I don't know. I'm looking at you, Roger. There's a lot of good things there. So why don't you put that on there? Jordan said his favourite thing is his youngest son. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's a bit
I
self-gratifying.
thought Jordan was my youngest son.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. That's just confusing. Well, anyway, Pastor Peter's here, and he's going to be continuing the series that we've been looking at on detours, delays, destinations. Why don't I just throw straight to you? You can share a bit of the background of that series and what's in your heart to share today.
Exactly. I've loved this series that the whole team has been putting together on detours, delays, disappointments, and I won't go into all the other ones that
they can throw them up for you.
They can put up there, and you can read all those, because it talks about the fact that life isn't an A to B; it's more A to Z with a whole lot of other letters in between getting there. And I love the point that we've brought out each week about the fact that God gave a promise to Abraham and said, "You're going to possess this land, and your children and what's going to be known as the Israeli nation is going to become." This is their promised land. This is their possession. And you think, oh, that's wonderful. And then you get to the possession of that, and it's 700 years later. 700 years. I remember Roger actually sort of sent me a text and said, do we have to wait 700 years for our next premiership in football? Is that how it works?
Yeah, it depends who you go for. Right?
Yeah. There's some teams might say, well, that'd be quick. We're just on our 4th rebuild. I think if we've got that graphic there where it shows, how a lot of times you see things from A and there's a straight line. There's the promise, there's the fulfillment. You're straight in the land, and that's how we think we go there to there. But how many know that's not how life is? But can I just say, sometimes we think, that's how life is, but it's not what God intended, in the sense that God's always trying to get us on this straight line. He's trying to flatten the curve. He's trying to make things go straight. But when you look at the Bible, it's full of detours, and what it often looks like is this. That's what life. And I'm so grateful that when I go to the Bible, I don't find a book of pristine characters that are just A to B people and everything's perfect. Everything just goes exactly right. Yes, you have your sinners, and yes, you have your evil people, and yes, you have the people doing the wrong things. But once they turn to the Lord and once you embrace God, things just go so beautifully and so smoothly. And I think the example of going into the promised land, because that is something we're talk about so much in the New Testament, that's a type of what we are doing as a people going into that promised land. And you look back and there's so many things going wrong and right and wrong and right and ups and downs, and I love it. I love it because it shows that life is messy and life is not just black and white. There's so many different things to contend with and to work through. And so, Caleb, we were talking, and the thing that was on my heart, I actually went back and I was just studying and looking at what it looks like when they came to that critical moment right before they were to go into the promised land. God had the intention for them to go straight in, and yet they sent out 12 spies. The spies came back with their report, and that changed everything. And instead of going in, they spent 40 years in the wilderness before they entered in. And I've just been thinking and meditating about that particular time, because that's a critical moment.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And there's times
that's a fairly significant moment. For us, we've heard the story before, so it can become familiar. That's a significant moment. You're about to go into the promised land, and you muck it up to the point that you have to go and walk around in the desert for 40 years till one generation dies and the next one goes in. That's a significant moment.
That's quite a. Imagine the next 40 years infected by something you do now.
Yeah.
And it happened over 40 days the 40 days was they were sent in to spy out the land. But then when they came back, it basically happened, they received the report. Overnight they made a decision. The next day, so within 2 days, things had changed. Within 2 days, everything had turned around. And so, there's drawn out things, there's things that happen over a long period of time, but there's also critical moments. So I was being drawn to that, to think about and look at that. And then I particularly began to look at it through the lens of, there's different ways of looking at things. And I started to look at through the life of Joshua. And that's why I can't even think of it. I couldn't think of a D word. I was trying to think of a D word. But the delay, the title for this message is Help My Delay, my detour is unfair.
Yeah, this is unfair.
Yeah, this is unfair. This is so unfair. My detour is unfair.
Maybe if anyone's got an idea, you can pop in the comments a word that means unfair but starts with D. So
Yeah,
it's got.
Can I just say it's got to mean unfair,
yeah,
not just start with D. All right, otherwise I've seen what we've got in some of the other times. And we were talking about. When things are unfair.
Sorry, we've got done fair has been commented.
Done fair. Yeah.
It's don't fair.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to, when we were teenagers, we used to play I Spy with my little eye, something beginning with D. And eventually it was like, door, but then it'd be dealing, dare, Diano. Yes, Diano. And so that was how we played. It could be anything. Just set up with the D in front of it. That's what it was.
Sermon series was made for you.
Yeah, there you go. There's an idea, kids. Go run with that one. I was thinking about unfair situations, and I actually went back to my school days. So I was at technical college, so it was equivalent of about year 12 today. And I was doing an engineering class, and this particular stream, mostly guys did it. In fact, there'd been years where only guys were doing it. So 15, 20 guys were just doing this engineering class. And I did it in a year that there was one female student. And I think her name was Angela. Angela was sort of, would have been about 17, 18, and blonde, long blonde hair. And seriously, I think it affected the teachers. Did their head in. And I was trying to remember the name, and I actually went back to pulled out my filing cabinet, found an old reference because I couldn't remember the teacher's name, and it's Mr. Miles. I found this reference from Mr. Miles. It was very kind to me. He spoke a nice reference. Shout out to Mr. Miles if you're watching. Thank you for your reference. I guess it helped me get my job. But Mr. Miles came in one day, and we had to do a particular class where we had to bring our own equipment with us. It was drafting and drawing equipment. So we had a little kit of stuff that you had to bring with you. And is it Angela? Did I say? I think it's Angela.
And your story.
Andrea. I'm trying to think. Angela. I'm trying to. What did I say? I think her name was Angela. Anyway, Angela came in and she'd left her drawing equipment at home, and it was like, oh no. And Mr. Miles, as soon as he found it, he goes, "What's the matter?" He goes, "Oh, I can't." He's like, "That's all right." And he's running around the class and he's getting this bit of equipment. And he gets his own equipment. Here's a spare pencil and here's this. And he couldn't. And he's like, "I feel really bad." "Oh, don't worry. There's no problem." And me and my mate Pete Davis were sitting there going, the eye roll, because the week before, Eddie from Myrtleford had left his equipment at home.
Classic Eddie from Myrtleford.
Eddie was a fun guy. Eddie from Myrtleford, and Eddie had Mr. Miles tore strips off him. How dare you forget your stuff? You've got to remember that's so important. So next week, Angela forgets her thing, and we're all watching, and it's, oh, don't worry about it. And he's getting equipment for everywhere. And we get outside, and she goes, "I'm so embarrassed," because, it's obviously this guy hasn't seen a female in his class for a long time. And
maybe he hasn't seen a female.
Yeah. I think that was probably it. Mr. Miles, thank you. I'm sorry about that, but thank you for your reference. You were good to me. Thank you. Just in case he's watching, things on the internet, you never know where they're going to get out of. So,
if you are watching, Mr. Miles, please shoot us a message and say hi.
Yeah, if anyone wants
Tell
to...
us what Pastor Peter was really like in class.
Oh, he said I was very polite. I was just reading it, actually, so that's good. I'll show, we might post it, Anyway, but do you have a story where things are just not fair? Are you the Eddie where you're like, that's not fair? You treat me one way and you treat someone else totally different. It's just not fair.
Yeah, if you've got a story, why don't you put your hand up in the comments and say, "I've been treated unfair." We don't need you to bare your souls and get offended at things over again. It's not the point of Taters. This is not about riling up all the anger of past things that we finally
maybe
dealt with.
Eddie's watching and getting some emotional healing now.
Yeah, Eddie, if you're watching, maybe this is for you. Maybe that story was for you. But before we move on quickly, we had a couple of suggestions were disappointing, almost means unfair, disproportionate, or Caden has said definitely not fair.
No, that works.
Yeah,
But definitely not fair, Detour.
definitely not fair. Detour. And just very briefly, also, I did see a bunch of comments come up at people's favourite things about Pastor Peter. We had some lovely comments. We had your magic tricks came up. People like your magic tricks and your dad jokes. They were referenced pretty quickly. So it's good, isn't it? You know, Pastor, you've got a good reputation of doing good magic tricks and good jokes. There were some other slightly more spiritual comments as well, which you can probably read through and get encouraged by later.
Thank you. I'll go back over those. And if you wrote rude comments, I will go back over those as well. So just be warned. Everyone's trying to delete comments.
That's a challenge, I think.
Okay, back to Joshua. Because what I wanted to do was I wanted to look at this whole moment, this key decision moment where the children of Israel suddenly went from going, hey, we're going into the promised land, to where suddenly you're going to spend 40 years in the wilderness. And God said it's because of the unbelief of the people. It's because of the bad report of the spies and the fact that they were then, they so turned the hearts of the people that the whole nation had to be set aside and let the next generation rise up. Except Joshua was like, hang on a second, I was one of the spies. I didn't say the wrong thing. I didn't do that. I wasn't, you know.
Yeah.
But also, I just sort of looked at it through his eyes, and what I sort of discovered went beyond what I thought. You know, sometimes you think you know a passage, and you're very familiar with something, and I thought I knew it, and I'd read it and understood it, but there was some things in there that I hadn't picked up on.
Should we read that story quickly? Is that what?
Yeah, can we do that? Did you want to read it, or?
Yeah, I can read that. Could you grab that story for us? Let's read from Numbers chapter 13 and verse 26. And we'll quickly look at that story. We have looked at this in the past couple of weeks a little bit, but let's just go over this so that we're all on the same page and we can see, again, with fresh eyes, like Pastor Peter just said. He's read this story many, many times, but suddenly he's seeing it with fresh eyes. And let's read this story particularly through the eyes of Joshua. So the backstory, as we've said, to this verse in Numbers 13:26, they're on the brink of the promised land. God's ready to send them in, but the people said they wanted to actually send some spies in just to scout it out beforehand. So God said, okay, you can do that. So they chose 12 spies to go into the land. Now, 2 of those spies we know quite well, named Caleb and Joshua. So they're 2 of the spies who have gone in with these 12 to scout out the promised land because we're finally about to go in and possess the land that God has given us. So whenever you've got that, Numbers chapter 13 and verse 26 will just pop up on the screen there. Might be a couple of technical difficulties they're having with that. So in the meantime, I'll just start reading it. If you've got a phone at home, you can follow along, or maybe you've got a real paper Bible. Maybe that's pretty crazy. All right, having a few troubles with that. So let's just read that out here. So the spies have gone into the land. They've been there for 40 days. They've come back. It says they came back to Moses and Aaron and to the whole community of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They reported to the whole community and showed them the fruit of the land. They told Moses, we went to the land where you sent us. It is indeed flowing with milk and honey. That means it's a land of abundance, a land of great provision, and this is its fruit. But the inhabitants of the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Those are giants. The Amalekites live in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Cellulites, and the everyone elseite live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. So they're saying to the people, yeah, it's a great land, it's a fruitful, beautiful land, but there's giants, and there's these enemies, and this army. And to us, we're just like, oh yeah, Amorites, Hittites, Jebusites, and whatever, ites. But to them, it's like, oh no. Not them. They're powerful warriors. Oh, and them. Oh, they're known for having a great army, and they're strong warriors. Oh, so they're saying we can't do this. We can't do this.
Can I say it'd be like you're the 4th grade Eastern Region football team, and you're just looking at your draw for the year. So the new draw comes out, and the first one is a combined AFL Victorian team that you're up against. And then there's the next one is the combined Western Australia, South Australian team that you're up. They're like, what? That's how they were thinking. They're saying these are serious warriors. These are people that are well entrenched, and so to them, these names meant something.
And the Israelites are not
Well, they've been slaves.
They've been slaves for hundreds of years, so they are not warriors. What they've got is God's blessing, and he's trying to. We actually talked about this in our small group the other night. He is trying to change their perspective because they're still stuck in a perspective of they're slaves, and they say, "Oh, they're warriors. We couldn't defeat warriors. We're just slaves."
Yeah.
But they've got God's blessing on them. But they are like a Division 4 football team coming up against an AFL side, being like, we can't do that. Yeah. That's ridiculous. So when we look at like, oh, you guys are so afraid, you guys are such wusses, their fears were well grounded in the natural, but not by what God said. Let's read on. So this is verse 30 now. Do you have that on the screen? Was that a thumbs up I got? Awesome. Let's pop this up. So verse 30 says, but Caleb, he's a good man, Caleb, he tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. He said, let's go at once to take the land. He said, we can certainly conquer it. But the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. They said, we can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are. So they're saying they're like a better football team. They're just too strong. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. The land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people who we saw were huge. So they now spread this bad story. They say, we can't go and do this. We're not going to be able to do it. We'll go actually the next verse as well. We even saw the giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers. Look at this. And that's what they thought too. So they said, we felt like grasshoppers, and they just think we're grasshoppers. We can't do this.
I love that thought. I thought, who did they interview to find that out? Yeah. We've done a survey. We went actually walking. We walked through the giants and said, "Excuse me, what do we appear like to you?" No, they have totally projected that last part.
Yeah.
They have said we were grasshoppers in their sight. Yeah, fair enough. They're talking from what they saw, and he said, and we were grasshoppers in their sight. That's totally untrue. They don't know what they were thinking. They were presuming that. They saw it through the filter of their fear and created a reality. And the truth is that when they actually, after 40 years, they went through, there was one city, it was the first city they went to, was Jericho. And it says when they came up to Jericho, it says Jericho was tightly shut up. And they sent two spies in there to that town, to that city. And they said, "Oh, we've heard reports about what you did to Egypt. We've heard reports about you coming through the sea and what the Lord has done for you. We are scared of what you're going to do." Yeah. So it's interesting that their perspective, actually, they were petrified because they'd heard of what God had done amongst His people, and they were like, "Well, who is this people?" But that's not the spies didn't come back and say, "Oh, listen, these people they'll have been hearing about what God's doing." No, they said we're grasshoppers in their sight, and that's one of the challenges through all this. You can create an understanding that goes well beyond what you know to what you perceive. Yeah, and you believe that is the reality. And we're not saying that they were wrong in saying, "Oh, they're up against a great team." We're not saying that. We're saying they didn't see it in the light of what God had said. They saw it in the light of their fear, and that fear created even a bigger problem. And it's amazing when we try. It's what I find is sometimes people try and say, "Listen, I'm just being realistic," but when they try and be realistic, they actually get unrealistic. It's amazing that they think I'm just telling you the truth, but they're actually telling me they go beyond even the truth. It gets bigger and worse. There was a time when Moses said, when the people said, "Oh, we want food, we want fish," and Moses complained to God, and he said, and God said, "I'll provide, this." And Moses said, "There's not enough fish in the ocean to feed this group." And I'm like, you know what, Moses? That's not actually even true, Moses. There's plenty. This is not that big a group. Do you know what I mean? That you can't. But Moses, there's not enough food around anywhere to feed this group. He had, through his own angst and upset, it had got bigger than it even was. And you've got to watch the filters, because you can actually go from thinking, "Oh, this is normal," to you're actually even not normal. You don't even know it. Anyway, so that's a bit of a side thing. What I'd like to point out, though, there is, hey, we're not just reading this story. We're looking at it through the filter of Joshua. As good as Caleb is, and in this story, he's a bit of a hero in the story.
Not just a bit. He's a...
Yeah, well, actually, he's the hero of this story, isn't he? Caleb. That's actually why we named Caleb, because he would have the same spirit of faith and boldness and be different like this Caleb in the Bible. So I'm certainly a Caleb fan in the Bible. Caleb fan, just being really clear what I'm talking about there. I'm a big Caleb fan.
I really like Peter in the Bible.
Yeah,
He was a good guy.
and it says that. Did anyone pick up, looking this through the lens of Joshua, what was a little bit different about this passage? Caleb, what did you pick up?
Well, there's not much of a mention of him, is there?
There's no mention of him in this. There's mention of him that he went as one of the 12.
Yeah.
But when the report came back, it doesn't say Caleb and Joshua said this. It just says Caleb. Now, I
It
know
was Caleb, and the spies gave the bad report. So
Yeah.
the spies gave a bad report, but Caleb gave a good report.
And-
that
and-
would suggest that Joshua was getting lumped in with the bad spies.
Yeah, and it said all the rest said, and then, hang on a sec, Joshua, whoa, I'm getting dumped. Why does this not specify? Because later on, we do know in chapter 14, we do find out that he did not agree.
No, he and Caleb were together in their faith.
But it doesn't specify here. And do you ever feel like, whoa, what? Excuse me, I just want to justify myself in this. I don't know whether anyone ever feels like justifying themselves. Do you ever feel like you've been given a raw
what's his
deal?
name? Eddie from...
Oh,
where did he come from?
I'm guessing Eddie would have had many choice words outside of the classroom. Yeah, but we never, and I think we tried, people tried to say things, but they were shut down pretty quickly. It's. Do you ever feel like you want to justify yourself? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. I can't imagine that feeling. But yeah, it's interesting that Joshua doesn't get a mention here. Joshua, it's Caleb. Caleb is the champion of this situation, and so I'm just trying to think. Hey, when it's even reported, how's it being viewed? Because you know what, sometimes things happen, and you're like, whoa, you put me in a bad light there, or I didn't get the credit I deserved, or hey, you've lumped me in with others by your by not doing things. Sometimes things happen, and it's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Joshua should have got the recognition. It's probably not fair, but it wasn't. And what about, we don't necessarily need to read all the rest of it just for the sake of time, but the story goes on that Joshua and Caleb do try and say to the people, no, let's be in faith, but the people get upset and they say, no, we can't do this. God's brought us here to die. God's brought us here because he hates us. We're going to die. And the story eventuates, as we said before, that God says this generation, these people are so full of unbelief, they cannot go in the promised land. Now we've taught about that a fair bit the last few weeks. If you want to go back 2 weeks ago, we had the message Getting Back to Plan A, where Kyra and I talked specifically about this story and about getting onto the plan that God's got for us. So I encourage you, after this, go back and watch that. But the point here, the people then had to wait for 40 years. God said, you are so full of unbelief. You guys are so full of fear and unbelief and will not grab hold of this with faith. I'm going to have to wait an extra 40 years. It says in Hebrews for them to wander around so they would all drop dead in the desert. I love that statement. Drop dead in the desert. It's just such a beautiful way of putting it. But God actually said, well, you're going to have to wander around for 40 years till all this generation dies out, all the adults, and the next generation is going to have to rise up, and we're going to have to teach them faith so that they can then come and enter into the promised land. Now, the only exceptions to that rule, the only two people that didn't die in the wilderness that we're going to live on to go into the promised land, possess it, everyone, you guessed it,
Caleb
and Joshua. The two spies who gave the good report, the two spies who were full of faith, Caleb and Joshua. So we say, that's good. Joshua didn't get the mention that he deserved. He didn't really get recognized like he deserved, but he still gets to see the promised land. 40 years later, he's got to wait in the wilderness 40 years for something that he didn't even do.
Can I just share? We know Joshua was part of this because in verse 6 of chapter 14 it says, Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the Jephunneh of the... They both together said, don't do that, don't believe this.
Yeah.
And then God sort of says, this is what's going to happen. But then it says, God in verse 23 says, they'll not see the land. And verse 24 says, but they won't see the land, but my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit
That's
and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of. Now the Amalekites and Joshua will like, excuse me? What am I, chopped liver?
Yeah. I've been here in faith, people like, oh, thank you, Caleb, for being the hero of this story. Caleb's going to get to see the land still. Caleb's going to get to go in. He's not going to die in the desert.
Yeah.
So everyone else is dying in the desert apart from Caleb?
Now it does say, verse 30, surely you shall not come into the land which I have sworn to settle, except Caleb and Joshua. So eventually God, does qualify. It's Caleb and Joshua. But they're right at the hero moment. He says, there's someone with a different spirit here. There's someone who's not like you, and his name is Caleb. And Joshua will be like, well, what am I? What am I? It's funny, like it's easy enough reading it from this side, but through, things like that happen, don't they? It's awful at times when you think, well, what about me?
Haven't you been in a situation like that where there's a big pump up and it's like, oh, we're going to celebrate someone, you're ready to get out of your chair because it's obviously you, and then they say someone else's name?
Yeah.
Oh, this is awkward. That was for anyone who saw that. I think that was Jeremy Howe at the Brownlow 2 years ago. When he's a footballer, and everyone just knew he'd taken the best mark of the year, and he was going to win mark of the year. And they had the big announcement, and he was literally getting out of his chair as they called out someone else's name, and the room went dead silent. It was like, it's not him. So yeah, he didn't win a car, but anyway, he would like to be justified for that, I'm sure. But that's how Joshua would have felt in that moment. The big hero, the one who saved the day, is Caleb. Yeah.
And Joshua's like, well, what about me? What about me? What about me? And but it's interesting saying, okay, looking through that filter, it doesn't, listen, we're reading into this, and it doesn't say Joshua's upset. It doesn't even explain what Joshua's feeling. It just explains it. I'm just saying how I know I would feel, and I'm guessing how you would feel, and how many would feel in that situation to have the attention sort of go, when you're part of this, and it's like, they're amazing, they're amazing, they're amazing. But we were talking about this because this is sort of like, this is Joshua's big moment, but he didn't even deserve to be there. He came back with a good report. He was full of faith. And now it's even like, even in the disappointment and the detour that they're going to be, he's getting like the short shift, and he's not even been given he's not in recognition for the faith that he's got. So it's like, it's double whammy. I'm going to have to, I'm doing this, and God's not even really backing it up, and the report of this by Moses doesn't really back this up. It's not, and we're not saying that they forgot about him or anything like that. He actually became the leader after Moses.
Yeah.
But it's, I wanted to be real in the sense that, how do you feel at times when life's unfair and you haven't done anything, and then even the things that you should be getting don't seem to come? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I'll take that, but at least on this side, and then the other side doesn't turn up, and and you don't get even recognition, or it looks like God's, and it's like God's actually being harder on you, and it's so unfair.
Yeah, and I think I could imagine Joshua in this situation feeling like, this is not fair, because it's not. and why am I being treated differently to everyone else? And has anyone felt like that? Have you had moments where you feel like, why do I have to cop this? Why am I getting treated like this and not everyone else? And sometimes I think there's a sense where we can say, people will treat you unfairly. People will be unfair to you, but God will always be fair. God loves us all the same, and that's true. God does love us all the same. But we see in the Bible, God doesn't treat us all the same. And the way sometimes God treats different people, our human mind has a really hard time of dealing with that and saying, God, that seems very unfair. You were very hard on this person, but not so much on this person. Yeah. You gave Joshua a really tough run here. Why were you not more like, Joshua, I'm so sorry. Joshua, I'm going to work through it. Joshua, we need to elevate you. We need to do this. Yeah. Joshua copped it. And, we see when Jesus was on the earth, and this is something I've been really interested in looking at over the last couple of years, Jesus did not treat every person the same. We have a sense in us that for something to be fair, everything has to be even. We have to give everyone the same amount, everyone the same opportunity. Everyone needs to get this. I need to treat everybody the same way. If I do something nice for this person, I have to do the same nice thing for everyone else. Jesus did not go to that school of leadership. We would look at Jesus' leadership and say, you are a bad leader. You are going to make everybody upset. But he was not concerned. And that's because I remember we said right back at the beginning of this series, God is more concerned about your heart And God is more concerned about getting you sustainably into the good land and the future he has for you than he is afraid of offending you. God is actually not afraid of offending you. Jesus was not afraid while he was on the earth. Jesus was not actually afraid to offend people or rub them the wrong way or get them a little bit upset or offside, because he was looking at the heart. He was working on heart issues. It's like everyone else is working on this plane here saying, but he didn't say this to me and he gave them this opportunity. He didn't do this to me and I didn't get the recognition I deserve and I didn't get this. And Jesus is like working so much deeper than that, saying, I'm working this in your heart and this in your heart, and I'm preparing you for this, and I'm preparing this for what you can't even see. And you know what? I'm going to keep working at your heart and keep developing that. And if you get offended in the meantime, and if you cross your arms and spit the dummy and throw the toys out of the bath and say, I didn't get treated like they did, Jesus is happy to wear that. He's happy to deal with that, because I'm going for the heart. I'm not afraid of offending you. And that's a really important concept for us to recognize, is that God is actually not afraid of offending me. God is not afraid of me getting upset. God is not going to say, I'm going to treat you always perfectly what you will consider fair. Now, God is entirely just. God is entirely fair. But the surface level of what we see doesn't always seem like that. Surface level of what we see, often it can seem very unfair. And it can seem like, why are they getting this and they getting this? And I'm here. I'm like Joshua. It's not like, I'm not saying, well, you're right, I've done the wrong thing, now I'm copping my dues, that's okay. I feel like when we've done it, it was like, well, I'll cop the penalty for that, that's okay. It was like, God, I'm here doing the right thing, being faithful, being one of the only 2 out of like millions who are actually being faithful towards you here. Yeah. And yet, why am I copying this? They're getting this nice treatment, they're getting this nice treatment. What about me? And maybe you can relate to that. Maybe there's times you say, this is just not fair. Yeah. Everyone else is getting better treatment than I am.
Hey, can I say something? I reckon Joshua would have been all right if Caleb didn't get any recognition either. It's all right when you're like, it's like no one is or everyone is, but it's the worst is when some do and some don't. I was like, well, hang on a second. Do you know what I mean? I remember one of the great healing ministers in the world, when he was talking about that, they were really pushing into getting healing, and they didn't see any results. They knew healing was in the Bible, but they couldn't get anyone healed. They couldn't get anyone healed, and they couldn't get anyone healed. And I'm trying to think of the past. Christine might know. We went to see a conference of him, very well known healing evangelist, but he was talking about this story of when he couldn't get anyone healed in his church, but they knew healing was of God, and they were believing. He said, that was all right. He said, but it got worse when one person got miraculously healed. Like, seriously, total God healing, and it was like, kaboom. He said, suddenly it was the people that weren't healed, when everyone wasn't getting healed, it wasn't too bad. But when one person got healed, they're all like, well, how come I'm not healed?
Mum's just commented to John Wimber.
John Wimber. Well done, Mum. Well done, Christine. John Wimber. Well done. John Wimber, yes. John Wimber, he said, it actually caused upset in the church when some got healed and some didn't get healed. Now, God wanted them all healed. And we know that, God's plan and purpose. In the same way as when they were getting no results, but they knew it was God's will for healing, suddenly they broke through a barrier and they got some healed. But they hadn't broken through barriers where everyone was healed. And that actually caused difficulties in the church, because people were like, well, how come he gets healed and I don't get healed? And they were happier when no one was getting healed.
Yeah.
They were happy when nothing was happening.
No one's getting it.
Yeah.
If I can't have it, at least no one else can.
Yeah, but it's sort of, well, what's wrong with me? And why isn't God fair with me? And so that's why I think it's worse that Caleb got recognition, and it's if no one did, then they're probably just as happy. But it's worse. And that's one of the challenges, is when we go through things aren't fair in terms of how it's perceived and what was said to us and what happens to us.
Can anyone relate to that? I'm thinking of situations in life, and I can relate to things where it's like, maybe I'm being really faithful. I'm faithfully believing God for something, for years maybe, and I'm holding strong to God's word and God's promise, and I'm digging into his word. And then someone else comes along and they don't give it 2 thoughts, and it just like accidentally happens for them.
Yeah.
It's like,
oh, look what God's done for me. I've been saved 2 weeks, and look, God's given me this, this, and this.
Yeah. And we're like, No, he hasn't. No, it's like, look, I mean, saved 2 weeks, and like, young people go through it all the time. Believing God for like a life partner, and it's like
Yeah.
you're believing God and pressing in and waiting, and someone else who doesn't even care and doesn't even think, it's like, oh, I accidentally got a girlfriend. We're getting married. It's like, oh, wonderful. I hope you get divorced. Like, I hope she's the bane of your existence. I'm so pleased for you. Praise the Lord. I hope you have a life of sadness and depression. So that's not. None of us would think that underneath, would we? Ever? Not for a second.
The issue, and we're not just sort of imagining things in the sense of, because we imagine it from our own perspective. I know what I go through the battles. But when you look at Psalms is a great place where you often see beyond the exterior of what people are doing to the anguish and the thoughts and the things they're going. And it's not. There's multiple times where the psalmist will say things like, don't fret because of the evildoers. Don't be envious towards the wrongdoers. Don't do this. And I was reading this Psalm 37 there. Psalm 73 talks about, says, I was envious of the arrogant, and I saw the prosperity of the wicked. There are no pains in their death. Their body is fat. They are not in trouble as other men. They're not plagued like mankind. Therefore, pride is their necklace. Their garments of violence covers them. Their eyes bulge from fatness. Their imagination, their hearts. That guy is dripping with, I'm so mad with these people. They're doing everything right. They're getting away with everything. But me, said, no. Verse 13, he says, hey, is it in vain that I've kept my heart pure and washed my hands in innocence? Because I've been stricken all day long and I've been chastened every morning. He said, I've been doing the right thing. I've been keeping myself pure, but I get corrected all the time.
Yeah, that's good, isn't it?
Go get corrected. He said, he is clever enough in the next verse to say, I would have said things like that if it wasn't for this. Don't you love that? I would have said that if it wasn't for this. Because I'm not saying all that. He said,
So I would tell this joke, but it's not appropriate.
Yeah.
But I would. If I was someone who would say this, I would say this.
I'd say this because I'm not. But I'm not.
But I'm not. So I would. I would never say that.
Because I'm not bitter and angry, I won't mention their fatness and the fact that they're doing that or anything like that. But because I'm not, and then he says, because you know what? He says, I went into the sanctuary of the Lord and I perceived their end. He said, I went in and I got my perspective right. And he said, he suddenly realized I looked at that through a lens that was different. And he said, I would have said that except for, thank God, I got a new perspective. But it's there, it's bubbling around underneath, and he's having to get it dealt with. And it's like, I would have, I get chastised.
Yeah.
How come they're not getting chastised?
And why doesn't it seem to hurt them? They're getting to go and enjoy their life and get fat and enjoy the pleasures of life and all this. But he's like, me, I'm here doing the right thing, and I'm just constantly getting chastised. Like, it's not fair. Why do they get to keep enjoying it? It seems to keep just going well for them. But for me, it's like, where's the fruit? Why this is not fair? And Joshua probably would have felt like that as well. That sense of, I'm doing the right thing. How many have felt like this? I'm doing the right thing. I'm in the right place, but it's just not fair. Everyone else, it seems to be fine for them, and they can do this, and they can say these things. They can they can just say whatever they want, and they can they can eat whatever they want, and they can go and watch whatever they want, and they can go and do whatever they want. They don't even prioritize going to church, and their life seems to be still going fine. I'm committing and I'm prioritizing. I'm doing everything you've called me to do. I'm the one getting up at 5 o'clock reading your word. I'm the one who's pressing in prayer every single day. I'm the one who's watching my words. I'm the one who's forgiving. I'm the one who's watching my heart and developing my heart. And yet they just seem to be enjoying the good life. Why not me? Why is this not fair? It's that it just doesn't. It cannot feel fair. Yeah.
Can I think this is a great thing that we'll leave here for people to explore more. And if you want to, I encourage you. The other thing I did was I read Deuteronomy chapter 1, because in that chapter it talks about this from Moses' perspective 40 years later. He recounts this story 40 years later. And it's, again, there's another emphasis in some, it's all the same story, but you're sort of seeing it from different lenses and things like that. But there was one thing, and Caleb pointed this out when we were talking before, and there's a key verse right in the middle of Deuteronomy 1 talking about this exact same time. And again,
So this is Moses. So 40 years later, Moses is recounting the story that we read before from Numbers.
Yes.
So he's recounting the story of when the Israelites the spies came back and gave the bad report. So this is Moses now telling that story
Yes.
40 years later.
Yeah. Deuteronomy is the whole point of Deuteronomy. Is that people say, I'm reading a repeat here. What you're doing is 40 years, the new generation's ready to go into the promised land. Again, this time they're going to go in under Joshua's leadership. It's a transition handover to Joshua, but he does so. He repeats all the training and teaching to this new generation. And part of it is he retells this story, and then he goes on to give them instruction as they're going forward. And in verse 38, it says, Joshua, the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall enter there. And then he adds this little phrase that wasn't in Numbers. I hadn't seen this in Numbers. I hadn't seen this till I saw it in Deuteronomy. It says, encourage him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. Caleb got to inherit his land and for his children and his hosts and his generations. But it says Joshua, the difference is Joshua, you're going to cause the whole of Israel to inherit the promised land. What an amazing promise. What an amazing thing to say about Joshua.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And it sort of if we're looking at this for our lives in that perspective, we've said so many times through this, I've said, how many can relate to that? I've said, how many can relate to feeling like it's not fair?
Yeah.
God's treating me harsher than someone else. God, they get to do this and they get to do this and I don't get to do this, or I get treated like this. I need to be justified. And so many of us can relate to that. And Joshua, I'm sure, could relate to that. Well, we can relate to that through his story and how he was being treated. But then we see with Joshua that through all of that, God was actually preparing him for something special,
way bigger,
something a bit extraordinary, something beyond what he was preparing the other people for.
Yeah.
God was preparing Joshua to lead them in. And I love it. That phrase is in Deuteronomy 1. It's also in Joshua chapter 1 when God speaks directly to Joshua. And he says, you are going to cause this people to inherit their land.
Yeah.
That's even goes beyond saying you are going to guide them in to possess the land. Again, today, that's probably not something we would say often to leaders. We'd say, you just need to facilitate these people being able to inherit the land. You're just going to be the one that's going to guide and,
give them opportunity to do it.
Give them opportunity to fully realize their potential because they're all land possessors in themselves. So God's saying, no, Joshua, you are going to cause them to possess their land.
Yeah.
One day they will be possessing their land because of you, because of what you've done and who you are. So God was preparing him for something really significant and something really special. But in the detour, it looked unfair. It looked like, man, this is rough. You're treating me harsher. You're treating me differently. It's not fair. But through that, God's like, I'm actually working something down in your heart because I'm doing something a bit bigger for you. I'm doing something a bit bigger and a bit special. And sometimes, like that psalm we read with David before, he's saying, why do they get to do this and they get to do this and they get to do this and they get to do this? Well, because God's saying, they're not going to lead that nation into a land. They're not going to do this really amazing thing. And sometimes when God is seeming to treat us more harshly, when God is saying, no, you got to cut this out and you got to cut this and you got to watch this attitude and you got to do this and you don't get this. It's like, why? It's not fair. Why? They get to and they get to. Like, well, because where they're at, I can't prepare their hearts for what I can prepare yours for.
Yeah.
I'm getting deeper and stronger and harder into your heart to do things because you're going to go into something extraordinary. If you want, you can go live like them and that's fine.
But you also get where they're going.
Exactly. You get the ordinary results of where they're going. But if you want the extraordinary outcome, you're going to have to do the extraordinary detour, if that makes sense.
Sometimes you see like with a coach, like maybe a music coach or a sports coach or something like that, and they treat one student harsher than another student.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's unfair. That student actually has got a lot more potential, and I am actually working harder on them because like with this musical piece, I don't think this student actually can play this piece. So I'm softer on them. I don't put that expectation. But this one, their ear is such a good musical ear. Their ability is really good. So I'm actually much harsher. But if someone was just watching them, they say, you treat one student easier than the other. Well, it's because he's not expecting the same result from both of them.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if you're ever feeling, it's unfair, God's being unfair to me. We know the world's unfair, we know the devil's unfair, but sometimes we say, God's unfair. You got to say, well, hang on a sec. Do I want the same results as all those around me? It looks like they're getting off scot-free. No, they're not. Eventually, if you sin, Bible says you cannot mock God.
Eventually it catches up with you.
You cannot mock God. Galatians, you cannot mock God. Galatians 6, God will not be mocked. What you sow, you will reap. And so don't ever think that, hey, someone's blind, someone's pulled Swifty on God and they're getting away with it. No, it's a short term. It'll come back to them. So you say, well, I want to be like them. No, you don't want to be like them because you don't want to be getting their long-term harvest. And that's what I think with Joshua. He was able to work through all these situations, keep his heart good, keep his heart pure before God, because God was able to then use him to cause Joshua to bring the people of Israel into that harvest, into their inheritance.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He was preparing him for something greater. He wasn't just preparing him to be someone who would go in and live in the land. He was preparing him to lead the people and cause them to inherit the land. And that required big growth and big extra character training. You need more character to lead the people into the land than you need to get into the land. And you need more character to get into the land than you do to wander in the wilderness and die. And so
exactly.
And so the detour can be like, oh God, that's not fair. That's not right. And we see that all the time with Jesus. He would treat people so differently because he's always working different things in their heart. Because,
like the rich young ruler. You got to do this.
Awesome story.
Whoa.
Yeah, rich young ruler came. He said, "I want to follow Jesus. I want to follow after you. I want to become a disciple." And we'd be like, imagine someone said that to us. They said, "Oh, I want to lay down my life and to serve the church and follow you." We'd say, "That's great. How can we facilitate that and make it easy for you and make it natural?
Yeah.
How can we make that as comfortable as possible?" That's what we naturally want to
sell
say.
everything, and then when you've done that, you can come follow me.
Yeah, sell everything you've got. Give it to the poor. He didn't give that. Not all his disciples got that got that instruction. Just him. So the ruler's like, why me? Why am I the one who's got to sell everything? I'm the one who's got all the stuff. Why am I the one who's got to sell everything and give it to the poor before I can follow you? And he said he couldn't do it. And that's why he had to. Because Jesus said, it's still got a place in your heart. I want to do something amazing through you.
Yeah.
But I've got to work this in your heart. So you've got to do this. But he didn't have to, and Peter didn't have to, and he didn't have to do that. Well, that's irrelevant to you because I'm working them to their place and what's in their heart, but I'm working with you for what's in your heart to get you to that place. And that concept that an extraordinary promised land is going to require an extraordinary detour. It's going to require extraordinary heart work.
Yeah.
And that will sometimes look unfair when it's compared to other people who aren't getting extraordinary heart work, isn't it?
So a definitely unfair detour.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Caden. A D.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Caleb, I'll hand it back over to you and let you close this. But appreciate everyone's comments, and I will go back and read those lovely comments from earlier, and maybe some others because I've been scrolling before I could chance to read them all. But I'll hand back over to you and give you a chance to close here.
Yeah. No. Well, as we can I just pop a couple of the recent comments that have come in as we've been discussing this. I thought are great to put up just some great thoughts here and things that God's speaking to people. I love seeing them shared. Judith just said God's seeming neglect can actually mean special attention to prepare for what's ahead. Isn't it? It's an interesting thought. It's had what can seem unfair. It's like, God, you're not treating me fairly. You're ignoring me. God's like, no, I'm actually doing a work in your heart that's actually special attention for something that's coming up. Mark had a comment just up there. Sometimes I think God knows our hearts better than we know our hearts. And he may be trying to show us something in our hearts that needs to be dealt with. We say, that's right. You go, God, it's not fair. Why do they get this and they get this and I have to do this? God's like, there's something in your heart. You don't even know it's there. And I'm dealing with it. Yeah. Because I'm dealing with that especially for you. There's been a lot of great comments. We won't go through them all now, but we appreciate that. And I feel maybe should we just pray and bless you all into a great week of this. And I know. Would you like to pray, Pastor? Would you pray for? And in this, I really encourage you. If you're watching this, we'll be closing up in just a minute. But I really encourage you that God is. I really believe God's been speaking through this, and this message has come through very clearly that God doesn't treat each of us the same. And so it will often look unfair. And you will go through detours. If you're following God wholeheartedly, you will go through a detour or detours that seem unfair, that seem like, why do I have to cop this and not everyone else? That seems like God is treating you harshly, or God is treating you, maybe neglecting you or ignoring you, but God is preparing your heart and doing things in you that are extraordinary. So I really encourage you, whoever you are, wherever you're watching this, I want you to know that God has got extraordinary things ahead of you. And if you're willing to open up your heart for him to work in that and to dig down deep and to do the uncomfortable, to do the stuff that might seem unfair, but if you're willing to say, God, just work in me, I leave the fairness up to you. I'm going to trust you to be just. And I'm just going to wholeheartedly follow everything you're doing and working in my heart. I'm going to celebrate with those around me. I'm going to, like it says, mourn with those who mourn, praise with those who praise. I'm going to celebrate with everyone around me and what you're doing in their lives. Then let's see the awesome things God can do. So I encourage you, Pastor Peter's going to pray here. I really challenge you to open your heart in this and say, God, let this be my prayer. Let this be my heart, that I want you to do something extraordinary in me and through me. I don't want my desire for fairness to get in the way for that. So would you pray for us, Dad?
Yeah, Father, I thank you. First of all, I love that everything we can share and talk about is in the context of you. You know us. It says you've numbered the hairs on our head. You actually know us inside out. You know us better than we know ourselves or anyone could ever know us. And Lord, secondly, you love us extravagantly, overwhelmingly. Your love for us can never be doubted. You left heaven for us. You went to the cross for us. Your love is true. And we marry those two things together and we say, you know us better than anything and you love us more than anything. So when we go through things and we feel it's unfair, we choose to trust you. And we choose to embrace your work in us through that. Not compare and look left to right and say, but what about them? But we choose, Father, to receive what you're saying to us. We allow you to discipline and train us. I appreciate what it says, and Lord, you said that a father would not love his child if he didn't discipline them. That it's actually an expression of your love at times when there's correction, when there's work, when you use moments to teach and to train and to purify us. But Lord, we have total trust in you. And Father, I thank you. I pray for everyone that's been watching, everyone that's now just opening up their hearts in prayer. That Father, your unique plan, your unique purpose and calling for them would come through all of this. That Lord, they won't hear unfair, they'll hear loved.
Yeah.
They won't hear unfair, they'll hear unique calling. They won't hear unfair, they'll hear resourced and helped to get through. And I pray for those, Lord, that are watching, that this is like water to a thirsty soul. This is not what they've heard in other parts of their life. I pray that, Lord, they will take further steps to go towards you, to find out more about this Jesus who loves them more than anything and has a perfect plan for them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. I agree with that. And I love what Dad prayed there. And that's really the heart of this message, is that what we see when we just look at the surface as unfair, that it actually means we're uniquely loved with a unique calling. The Bible says that we're each God's masterpieces, created unique for the great things he's got ahead of us. And what might seem, that's unfair, God says, no, that's because I don't just treat you as cookie cutters. I see you as unique, and I've got a great, beautiful, amazing future ahead of you, which is unique to you, and I'm going to prepare you uniquely for it. And so I want to leave you with that encouragement that whoever you are, God has got a unique love and a unique calling and future ahead of you. Now, maybe you've been following God for all your life, and so that's not news, but it's just an encouragement to know to press into that and to walk into it. Maybe you've been struggling with what God's been doing in your life or feeling like it's unfair, and this can be an encouragement to you to say, God, you love me in a unique way, and you have got a future which is custom designed just for me, that you've made me for. I open myself to you preparing me for that, and I let go of the pressure of it all being fair. Or maybe for you, this is all a bit new, and maybe you hear all this and you can relate to parts of it, and maybe the whole concept of God and following Jesus is new. I want you to know the key point for you is that God has a unique calling and a unique future that he's designed just for you, and it is good. He's got amazing things he wants to do in you, through you, transforming, restoring your family, your world. He has got a good future for you. And if you've got any questions about that, if that's something you want to explore, if that's something which is new to you, I'd really encourage you, firstly, get in contact with us. We would love to hear from you. You can send us a message on the phone number below, or if you're watching this on Facebook, just shoot us a message, or send us an email. You can also jump to our website, breakthrough.org.au, and we've got a bunch of resources on there to help you understand what it means to follow Jesus. There's some pages and resources there if you're just curious to know what it means to follow Jesus, or what it's all about, or you can find resources what it actually means to follow Jesus, how to follow Jesus, how to grow in that, and a whole bunch of stuff there where you can just explore that. There's no judgment, there's no expectation. It's purely a space we want to help you to explore that and understand that a bit more. And as I said, feel free to reach out, because we would love to be a part of your journey. Whoever you are, whatever step you're at on your journey, we'd love to be a part of just helping you to grow in that and step into that unique calling, that unique future. Because I think that's sort of the key of this message. If you hear anything, what we see as unfair is actually God's unique love and having a path custom designed for you to get you through to that amazing future He's prepared just for you. Nobody else in all of creation ever has or ever will have a future and a calling quite like yours, and He is willing to do whatever it takes to work with you and work with your heart and to get you into that calling, to be thriving, fulfilling all that He's called you to do. So we bless you into that today, church family. We love you guys so much. Super Kids, remember your code word came up on the screen. Here it is quickly now. If you want to jot that down, if you missed any letters, and you can jump onto the website to get all the resources and everything and earn your fun points and earn some great prizes. We're excited for that. Well, we love you, family. We are praying for you. We bless you into a great week. Go and be light, be salt in your world. And I want to leave you the final challenge to take what God has done in your heart through this. Take what God has worked in your life and live it out through your life. Live out that calling. Live out and connect with someone else. Bless someone else. How can you be a blessing? Especially here in Melbourne, there are a lot of hurting people in our community right now. I challenge you, who can you reach out to this week? How can you be a blessing? How can you connect with someone and help them grow as part of the family? I really encourage you and challenge you into that this week. But be blessed. Have a great week, and we will see you back here Sunday morning live from our living room. Be blessed.